Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading to the northern tip of Morocco, the Tangier Peninsula. We're looking at some really fascinating recent archaeological finds, stuff that's kind of rewriting the prehistory books for this area.
It really is. We've got a great source here, a detailed review article packed with info on cemeteries, rock art, even standing stones.
Right, and the time frame we're talking about is roughly, what, 3,000 down to 500 BCE?
That's the window, yeah. And what's so compelling, I think, isn't just, the individual finds. It's the bigger picture.
Okay.
We're starting to see this prehistoric ritual landscape that was, well, much more intricate, more active than we maybe appreciated before.
It's making us rethink things.
Definitely. Challenging some older views about North Africa in this period.
Okay, let's set the scene first. The Tangier Peninsula. Geographically, our sources stress how absolutely pivotal this spot is.
Yeah.
Like a major ancient intersection. Europe meets Africa, the Atlantic meets the Med. It's a gateway, isn't it?
Exactly. A natural bottleneck almost. And this wasn't just important later on, in historical times.
You're right.
The sources really highlight how, for millennia, this spot just channeled cultural exchange, constant flow.
And now the archaeology is backing that up.
Providing the tangible proof, yeah. Especially when you look at this complex web of burial traditions, these symbolic sites. It's all there.
So the mission for this deep dive, then, is to really get a grip on what these cemeteries, the rock art, the standing stones, what they all tell us together about life there thousands of years ago, beliefs, interactions, that sort of thing.
Precisely. We want to examine the details, piece together the social structures, the cultural practices, maybe even the economic links.
See how these people fitted into the wider world, the Mediterranean, the Atlantic.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start with the cemeteries. Because the sheer variety of burial types is pretty remarkable.
It really is.
Our sources are talking pit graves, hypogea, what are those again? Underground chambers?
Yeah, often rock-cut underground tombs. And then cists and tumuli, those burial mounds. It's quite a spectrum.
A whole range. And the recent fieldwork turned up 3 distinct cemeteries.
That's right. And one of them had a cyst burial, one of those stone-lined box graves. And they got a radiocarbon date for it, around 2000 BCE.
Now that's interesting, because the sources say this is the first time a cyst burial from this period has been properly dated in Northwest Africa.
Huge, yeah. It's a massive milestone for the early Bronze Age chronology there. Really gives us an anchor point.
So a cyst burial,
yeah,
just to be clear, it's like a small chamber built into the ground with stone slabs.
Exactly, like a stone box. And what's intriguing is, well, later on, cremation becomes really common across the Mediterranean, right?
Right.
But here in Tangier, they seem to stick with these cyst burials for much longer. It suggests maybe a different cultural path, a local preference.
Okay, but people were living and dying here long before 2000 BCE. What about earlier evidence?
Oh, absolutely. The sources mention earlier stuff like the Ibero-Mauritian burial at Hatab 7 in Cave. That goes way back, like 8900 BCE, super early North African culture.
Wow.
And then, jumping forward, you've got the Middle Neolithic Cemetery at Ruwasi-Shrat, around 4500 BCE, famous for its Achakarware pottery.
So there's a long history of ritual around death in this area.
Definitely sets the stage.
But then, the sources mention a bit of a gap. The Copper Age, maybe mid to late 3rd millennium BCE, not much funerary evidence turning up.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Just one possible burial at El Kilsi in the Echakar Caves.
So maybe burial customs changed then. Or we just haven't found much from that specific time.
Could be either or both. The archaeological record isn't always complete,
Right. But then Bronze Age, things pick up again. Cave burials.
Yes, at sites like Benzu and Hafs II. They're near Jebel Musa, which, interestingly, might be one of the legendary pillars of Hercules.
Oh, okay. Edge of the known world stuff.
Kind of, yeah. And what's really fascinating is the potential link across the strait.
To Gibraltar.
Exactly. Similar burials from the 2nd millennium BCE found in Bray's Cave over on the Gibraltar side.
So shared culture, close ties across the water, or just similar ideas popping up independently.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Raises lots of possibilities about interaction.
And then back on the Moroccan side, on the Echakar Plateau, these pit burials. 3rd to 2nd millennia BCE.
And they found this distinctive boat-shaped pot in one, which helped date them. Similar pit burials are found elsewhere too, wider North Africa, even Iberia.
Really shows the connections again.
It does. But then, late 3rd millennium BCE, These cyst burials really emerge as something new and significant, specifically in Tangier.
And building those. That takes effort, right? Resource.
A serious investment, which, as you say, might signal something about territory, marking your land, your community's space.
Makes sense. And there's a theory from George's camps that these Tangier cysts have different origins. Maybe Ibero-Atlantic.
Yeah, he suggested they're distinct from the dolmens you find more centrally and further east in the Maghreb. Not all stone tombs are the same tradition.
Interesting distinction. So what did these Bronze Age Tangier cysts look like?
Typically kind of trapezoid-shaped. 4 upright slabs, one big one on top, and often this crescent-shaped pile of stones on the east side.
Okay. And later, Iron Age, they change a bit, more rectangular.
Yeah, they evolve. More rectangular, often with a stone covering that looks a bit like a small tumulus, a mound.
And inside, what do they find? Bodies? Grave goods?
Usually, yes. The body often in a flexed position, curled up, sometimes sprinkled with red ochre pigment. And grave goods like handmade pottery, bits of tortoiseshell, and metal items. Awls, those pointy tools, palmella points a type of arrowhead, occasionally even a halberd or dagger.
And the sources say these finds look similar to early Bronze Age stuff in Iberia.
Clear parallels, yeah. Really strengthens that cross-strait connection idea.
Some cysts were found empty. That's odd.
It is a bit puzzling. Could be cenotaphs, like memorials for people buried elsewhere, or whose bodies were lost.
Or the remains just didn't survive.
That's the other possibility. Decomposition, later disturbance. It's hard to say for sure, but the fact some have burials and some don't might suggest cenotaphs were actually part of their customs.
And these cysts didn't just stop with the Bronze Age. They kept using them.
Yeah, remarkable continuity, right into the Iron Age, maybe 8th to 5th centuries BCE.
But things change a bit then. New types of grave goods appear.
Exactly. You start seeing stuff that reflects more contact with the wider Med world. Wheeled pottery, iron objects, jewelry with Eastern styles.
And the cemeteries themselves get bigger.
Some of them seem significantly larger than the Bronze Age ones, yeah, which might suggest bigger settlements, population growth.
Maybe. Plausible. Hints at social changes. And then you get a hypogea appearing. Early first millennium BCE.
Yes, those underground chambers, especially on the Ashakar Plateau.
And they look a bit like Phoenician tombs from Iberia and elsewhere.
There's definitely a resemblance in the architecture. Suggests influence or exchange.
But the stuff inside them.
That's the interesting part. The grave goods are often quite similar to what you find in the local cyst burials from the same time.
So maybe local people adopting a new tomb style, but keeping their own burial traditions.
Yeah.
Or maybe people of mixed backgrounds.
Exactly. Suggests adoption and adaptation, not just replacement.
Okay. We can't ignore tumuli. Those mounds, they're everywhere in North Africa, right?
Oh, yeah. Tumuli and also bazinas, those sort of stepped monuments, they're really characteristic across North Africa. Mediterranean, Atlantic, Saharan regions, dozens just in Tangier.
And dating them is tricky.
Still debated, but there's some evidence suggesting some tumuli in northwest Morocco might go back to the 3rd or 2nd millennia BCE, and sometimes they're built over cysts.
Which raises questions about how they relate. Did one evolve from the other?
Fascinating questions, yeah. Still working on those.
And then there's Missoura. That sounds really impressive. Big standing stone circle, big tumulus.
Missoura's amazing. Huge circle, 176 standing stones, some over 5 meters tall, and this massive tumulus in the middle.
Wow.
There's a theory it was built in phases. Maybe the stones are older, 3rd millennium BCE, and the tumulus added later, mid-1st millennium BCE, Mauritanian period. They even found a Libyan inscription inside the tumulus.
So a place used and reused over centuries, millennia even.
Seems like it, a potentially very ancient sacred site being adapted.
And recently they found new cemeteries too, Daruaz Zaydan, Oulad Zin, Oued Siyar.
Yeah, recent surveys. Daruaz Zaydan was just a single cyst. Oulad Zin had a tumulus and some cysts. Oued Siyar was the biggest multiple tumuli, clusters of cysts.
But looting is a problem.
Sadly, yes. Significant evidence of looting at all 3. A real threat to understanding this past.
But that single cyst they excavated at Daruaz Zaydan, that's the one that gave the really important date.
That's the one. 2119, 1890 BCE, bang in the early Bronze Age. Really solidifies the timeline for cysts in this specific area.
And they did isotopic analysis. Found out about their diet.
Yeah, suggested mostly land-based food sources. Gives us a little glimpse into their lives.
And revisiting older known sites. Also useful, even with the damage.
Definitely. Even with destruction from development and looting, finds like a copper awl at Elmerez, plus old records mentioning looted daggers or halberds, pomela points, it all adds pieces to the puzzle of Bronze Age material culture.
And finally, on this theme, 2 new standing stones found along old routes.
Exactly. Adds to this picture of a marked landscape, ritual sites, territorial markers placed along pathways.
Okay, so stepping back, this whole variety of burials in Tangier, 3rd to 2nd millennia BCE, it sounds a lot like what was happening just across the water in Gibraltar in southern Spain.
That's a key point, yeah. The parallels with the Gibraltar area, the lower Guadalquivir plain, they're strong. Reinforces the idea of cultural links, maybe shared beliefs, across that narrow sea channel.
But there's a puzzle. Lots of cemeteries, especially around Tangier. Where are the Bronze Age villages?
Yeah, that's the tricky bit our sources highlight. Finding the associated settlements.
Why is that so hard?
Well, several possibilities. Maybe their houses were made of stuff that just doesn't last. Wood, mud brick.
Okay.
Or erosion, later building has wiped them out. Or, and this is intriguing, maybe there's a big undiscovered settlement buried under modern Tangier itself.
Wow. Like the modern city is sitting right on top of it.
It's a possibility. Needs more investigation. Interestingly, for the later Iron Age, we do have more success finding settlements.
Yeah.
Like Kanua. They found both the settlement and its cemeteries, cists and tumuli. Gives a clearer picture for that period.
And the sources really stress how these cemeteries and monuments seem tied to land routes, crossroads, like ancient signposts.
Exactly. Functioning as landmarks, defining territory, marking important routes through the landscape.
And the fact that these cemeteries are mostly just in the Tangier Peninsula?
Yeah.
That's significant too.
It's very intriguing. Makes you wonder if there was a specific local funerary coin, a shared set of burial beliefs unique to this region, maybe tied to their social structure.
And that social structure may be different from Iberia. The sources suggest maybe more kin-based groups in Tangier. Less evidence for big chiefs or hierarchies compared to early Bronze Age southern Iberia.
That's a key contrast they draw. Fewer big fortified sites in Tangier back then. Maybe the burial variations we see reflect family or lineage things rather than displays of concentrated power.
So Tangier might have been maybe a bit peripheral to bigger power centers in Iberia or further south?
It's a possibility, part of a wider network, but maybe not the absolute center.
But still, those similarities between the cists, Iberia, and Tangier, they're undeniable. What does that really mean?
It screams interaction, doesn't it? Could be direct contact, people actually moving back and forth, or maybe similar ideas developing in parallel. The DNA evidence mentioned from Spain, Loma del Porco, showing mixed ancestry. That hints at movement.
And this mixing, this cultural exchange, it continues into the 1st millennium BCE, even when the Phoenicians arrive.
Seems so. You get those Phoenician-style hypogea tombs, yes, but often in the same areas as the older cists, and crucially, with similar local grave goods inside.
Suggests local people were adopting the style, but maybe keeping some of their own traditions.
Exactly. It points towards adaptation and local agency, not just being overwhelmed by outsiders. It's different from southern Iberia, where cists mostly vanish and cremation takes over.
And those bigger Iron Age cemeteries in Tangier.
Yeah.
Maybe pointing to growing populations, bigger settlements later on, social changes underway.
It certainly suggests a dynamic situation, things evolving, and the gradual shift away from cists towards more tumuli from the mid-1st millennium BCE. That might reflect deeper socioeconomic changes, maybe growing inequality, the beginnings of elite groups, leading towards those later North African kingdoms, a different path than the Northwest Med.
Okay, let's broaden out from just burials. The sources talk about other ritual elements too, standing stones, rock art. Even rivers and caves being important.
Absolutely. It's a whole ritual landscape. Think about those stray finds of Atlantic European metalwork in the Lucas riverbed, late 2nd millennium BCE.
A flat axe and a rapier.
Yeah, a Ballantober-type rapier. Apparently the only one found in Africa so far. Finding them in a river that echoes ritual deposition practices we see in Atlantic Europe, throwing valuable things into water.
Interesting connection. And caves were special too. The Idol's Cave at Ashakar.
Definitely. Hundreds of prehistoric clay figurines found there, thought to be linked to sun cults, fertility rituals, highlights caves as powerful symbolic places.
And then there's the rock art. We knew about some already, like the paintings at Megara Sonar 1.
Yes, that was the main known painted site in the Northwest. Anthropomorphs, dots, animals, spanning a huge period from late Stone Age to Mauritanian times, plus some engraved cup marks known elsewhere, like at Missouri.
But the recent surveys found loads more.
A huge amount more. 24 new rock art sites, both open-air engravings and rock shelters with cup marks, and importantly, 16 new painted rock shelters. That massively increases the number of known painted sites there.
Wow, that's a major leap in knowledge. And these new sites, they show links to other regions.
They do. You see parallels with schematic art from southwest Iberia, the lines, dots, those bitriangular shapes, human figures. Also links to places like the Tulkine shelter and the Moroccan Atlas, even some echoes of Saharan rock art styles.
So connected traditions across big distances.
Seems like it. And some shelters have later Arabic inscriptions, too, showing these places stayed significant for a very long time.
What about specific motifs? Anything stand out in the new finds?
Well, some caves have these paired dot patterns, similar to older art at Megaris and R1 and also in Iberia, reinforces those connections.
Right.
And the engraved cup marks, they're widespread on both sides of the strait, but now they've found circular arrangements of them, which is common in Atlantic Europe. Another link.
And finding shelters with both paintings and cup marks?
Yeah.
That's new for the region.
First time recorded there, yeah. Suggests these were complex ritual spaces, maybe used for different things over time.
How do we interpret the cup marks? The sources mention linking them to water sanctuaries in Tangier.
That's one interpretation there. But elsewhere, like Atlantic Europe, people suggest they mark boundaries, liminal zones, ceremonial spots. Maybe they had multiple meanings. It points to a shared cultural language expressed through rock art.
And crucially, these art sites aren't just randomly placed. They seem linked to the cemeteries and other monuments.
Yes, the sources stress this intentional spatial relationship. Idol's Cave near the Ochakar burials. The Ziaten Cup marks near Sist and Tumuli cemeteries. And many of the newly found art sites are close to those new cemeteries, Darua Zayden, Uladzin, Oudziar, sometimes even within sight of each other.
Like the whole landscape was woven together with meaning.
Exactly, and the fact that many new sites cluster around a major ancient crossroads that reinforces the idea of roots being important and these sites marking territory and ritual pathways.
Does this pattern, rock art near burials, show up elsewhere?
Oh yes, very common in Iberia, also in places like the Middle Draw Valley in Morocco, suggests it was a widespread symbolic association. Rock art studies here are still young, but the links Atlantic Europe, Sahara are clearly vital for understanding these ancient cultural dynamics.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it seems clear the Tangier Peninsula from around 3000 BCE was this incredibly dynamic zone, lots of interaction because of where it is.
Absolutely. Its strategic position is key. And that interaction is reflected everywhere in the archaeology, the monuments, burials, rock art, ritual spots, with really strong parallels, as we've seen, to Iberia and the Sahara.
We've seen this really complex, evolving ritual landscape. Diverse burials, pits, caves, hypogea, cists, tumuli, symbolic sites, rock art.
And that persistence of cyst burials in Tangier, long after they faded in southern Iberia, that's a unique regional signature. Plus, the new finds suggest these cysts were more widespread, maybe marking territories along routes.
Though actually finding the matching villages for the Bronze Age cemeteries remains a challenge.
Still a bit of a puzzle in Northwest Africa, yeah. And the whole question of tumuli, could they be older here than we thought, maybe evolving from cysts? Lots still to explore.
In understanding this earlier period, the second millennium BCE, is so important for making sense of what happened later. The Mauritanian kingdoms, their different path from the Med.
Definitely. And it makes us reconsider ideas like colonization, seeing the continuity of local practices, the agency of local people. Even when faced with powerful external influences like the Phoenicians, it's not a simple story of takeover.
It's more nuanced.
Much more. The way cemeteries, standing stones, rock art seem interconnected along routes. It speaks volumes about ritual and territory, though, more research is always needed.
And the new rock art discoveries are huge. Opens up so much about prehistoric imagery, those trans-regional connections. And hence, there could be hundreds more sites out there, especially in the Rift Mountains.
Yeah, the potential is enormous. Crucial links to southern Morocco, Atlantic Europe, especially Iberia, is all there to be uncovered.
Which brings us to a crucial final point: conservation.
Absolutely vital. Our sources really hammer this home. Looting, development, agriculture, they're destroying this heritage at an alarming rate.
And every site lost is a piece of the puzzle gone forever. Hinders our understanding.
It's an irreplaceable loss, yeah. We need urgent action to protect what's left.
Definitely. Okay, on that serious note, here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. How does this ancient, interconnected ritual landscape in Tangier a bridge between continents, cultures over millennia. How does it challenge our modern ideas about separate identities? Does it maybe underscore a much longer, deeper history of human interconnectedness than we usually acknowledge?
Something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.